So we are recording, and Joe, are you there?
Hello.
Hi. I'll hand over to you now then.
Fab, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining. 27 of us, that's amazing. So I am the I suppose project manager for the Hedgehog Friendly Campus campaign, which really is a different kind of award scheme, similar in a sense to Green Impact, but is very niche in that it focuses on hedgehogs. We work exclusively, unfortunately, with universities at the moment, so anyone that's joined us from a hospital or other Green Impact setting, then unfortunately you can't get involved in the accreditation at the moment. However, a lot of what we'll be talking about today is quite general interest stuff, so stick with us, and we do hope that in the near future we'll be able to expand the campaign to other institutions as well as universities. So for anyone that doesn't already follow us, we've got all of our social media just on the screen in front of you there, and our contact email address at the bottom as well, so you'll get through to me on any of those. A big thanks to the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, which is the national hedgehog charity, for the funding for the campaign as well. You should check them out, guys, if you're interested in hedgehogs, which who isn't? So Hedgehog Friendly Campus is, the bones of it is, it's a free national university accreditation scheme. So we offer bronze, silver and gold levels to universities who complete initiatives to help hedgehogs on campus. So yeah, hedgehogs are a declining species, unfortunately, so that's kind of the background, the reason as to why we exist. We've got almost 70 universities on board. I do believe we may have just had our 70th, although I can't confirm that yet, but yes, I do believe we may have just had our 70th, which is great. So if anybody's joined us and isn't currently involved in Hedgehog Friendly Campus, please do get involved, staff and students, community members, anyone that's got an interest. So Hedgehog Friendly Campus means lots of different things to lots of different universities. Here are just a few examples of things that some of our teams have completed, ranging from litter picks to installing wildflower meadows, completing hedgehog surveys, installing hedgehog highways, and putting in lovely little snuggly hedgehog houses. There's lots and lots of different stuff that you can get involved in as a campus, and it really depends on who the team is, whether you're a team of students or a team of staff members or a mixture. We do give you a lot of flexibility in the initiatives that you can choose from, the initiatives or the actions that you can choose from. And it's a really well resourced campaign as well. So Hedgehog Friendly Campus is a campaign we do offer workshops, which at the moment are webinars, to sort of supplement the stuff that you do on campus. So some of our most popular this year have been the Hedgehog Survey Workshop and the Hedgehog First Aid or First Responder class. So those, as I said, are webinars. If you're interested in getting involved in those, then drop us an email. You can see the email address just on the screen at the bottom on the right hand side. As well as that, we do offer hedgehog ecology and land management courses for free to grounds teams, so university grounds teams. That's usually quite an expensive course that you can access for free through Hedgehog Friendly Campus. We'll also provide talks and lectures in general to supplement your campaign. For instance, if you're interested in learning a bit more as a university about how you can help hedgehogs from home, then we can offer you something that works for you. And it's all free and it's all fun. There's loads of student opportunities as well. So if you are a student that's joined us today, or if you have some students in mind to get involved in this kind of a campaign, we do offer some great resources to students. So at the moment, we've got a bit of a recruitment drive on for students. So we're asking for student ambassadors to come forward at universities that may or may not already have a Hedgehog Friendly Campus team in place, because there's loads of stuff that students can do to help towards this accreditation, whether it's writing blogs or social media posting, fundraising or awareness raising, or maybe even campaigning for change. There's loads of opportunities for student involvement. We do also offer free resource packs, certificates and CV references for those students that can and do get involved. So loads of reasons to get involved, really. So that's Hedgehog Friendly Campus in a nutshell. If you want to know more, do get in touch on info@hedgehogfriendlycampus.co.uk or drop us a message on social media. But I'm going to focus the rest of my efforts for the rest of this webinar on hedgehogs in particular. So for some of you, you may have seen hedgehogs before, some of you may not have. Usually when I do these webinars or talks, tend to ask for a show of hands or some kind of idea of how many of you have seen one. Unfortunately, not that many of us see hedgehogs anymore. There's reasons for that, which I'll go into in a sec. But they're lovely and wonderful creatures, and there's some basic information that we think that are need to knows. So let's get started with some of that. So the hedgehog that we're talking about in the UK is the West European hedgehog. And the Latin name for that kind of a hedgehog is Erinaceus europaeus. You find them across most of the west of Europe, and they're one of 17 different hedgehog species. They're Britain's only spiny mammal, so that tends to be how we recognise them, and they're a hibernating animal as well. So they are currently in their active period, and they'll be going into hibernation in the winter months when there's a lack of food and very low temperatures. We are not talking about this kind of hedgehog, although sweet and lovely, and photos of them all over social media. This is a pet hedgehog, also known as an African pygmy hedgehog. They are not the West European hedgehog. They're a completely different species, probably not that suitable for pets, to be honest. And yeah, please don't get them confused, because if you were to pick up a hedgehog from the wild in the UK and keep it as a pet, you'd be breaking the law. They do look very different as well. If you can see, these African pygmies, well, they're quite small and they're blonde as well. So our hedgehog, the native UK hedgehog, the West European hedgehog, you really find them all across the whole of the mainland, plus the islands. In terms of habitat, they inhabit woodland edges, grassland, hedgerows, gardens, loads of different places. They're quite generalist in their habitat choosing. The places you definitely won't find them are places like moors, marshlands and pine woods. Those places just don't offer the kind of nesting availability that hedgehogs need, really. Increasingly now we're finding them more in urban areas, so places like gardens and villages, as I mentioned, and unfortunately a recently quite reduced rural population, which there's more on in just a second. This image on the right hand side here is a citizen science map. It contains lots of Ordnance Survey data showing, so the blue patches are sort of the distribution of hedgehogs. There are some data missing from this map, so it looks as though Scotland is devoid of hedgehogs. We don't think that's necessarily true. It just needs a bit more citizen science data putting into it, really. And here's one kind of call to action for you guys that are listening. So the Big Hedgehog Map, or bighedgehogmap.org, is a citizen science map that you, staff, students, anyone in the community can contribute to if you've seen a hedgehog in the area, living or dead. So we really encourage you to log hedgehog sightings on this map, because it's useful for conservation projects like this one, but also because it's useful for local authorities, so local authority councils, to make decisions on really what the environment looks like for animals, for hedgehogs in particular. So if you look on the map, can you see there are some sort of pink splodges? Those are living hedgehog sightings, and the red splodges with a white middle, those are dead hedgehog sightings. So the local authority councils will be looking to maps such as this one to install things like hedgehog highways or possibly hedgehog crossing signs, which have just been authorised by the Department for Transport. Just a word of a bit of promo for the campaign. There's a new hedgehog friendly campus key on the Big Hedgehog Map. So if you've seen a hedgehog on your campus, please go on and log it, whether it was living or dead. And it doesn't matter if it was yesterday or 15 years ago, you have the option to put past sightings on there as well. We really do look to this map, so I can't sort of understate it. It's a great map, good resource, and quite useful for people to know if you've got hedgehogs in the area. So hedgehog anatomy is kind of what makes the hedgehog so charismatic, really. On the inside of the hedgehog, however, so if you take a look at that image in the top left there, so of a half specimen from a museum, you'll see that their skeleton actually is quite unspecialised. It looks a lot like many other mammal skeletons. They do have a short neck, so they're ground feeders. They don't need a long neck. So that short neck really is because they feed off really invertebrates from the ground. It's the outside, it's the external structure of the hedgehog that makes it quite specialised. So they have a very specialised skin, which is covered in spines, really from the brow to the back or the tail, and a muscle pouch that they're able to contract if they feel scared, so perhaps threatened by predators, which essentially tucks in all those soft parts, so the soft fluffy underbelly, the head, the nose and the limbs. So it protects all of those soft bits from predators. So it's quite a clever adaptation that they've developed over time, and they've really remained quite static in the way that they look in their anatomy for millions and millions of years. So it's something that works really well for the hedgehog. They've got a really interesting set of behaviours as well. So hedgehogs are nocturnal. We don't tend to see them out during the daytime. There are some exceptions to that. For instance, on the left-hand side here, we've got a mum carrying a hoglet, which is a baby hedgehog, from nest to nest. You may see that happen during the daytime. But typically when you see hedgehogs, it's out in, perhaps in your gardens or on your drive back from, you know, the pub or wherever, in the night time, really. So it just depends on what season you're in, the time that you see them out and about. They're generally solitary animals, so you don't tend to see them in social groups like you will foxes. But you may see them together in areas where there's lots of resources. So in your garden, if you're feeding hedgehogs, you might see more than one coming to sort of compete over those resources, really. They're not particularly aggressive animals, so they don't fight, they don't bother wasting their energy on fighting, but they do have a special way of competing. So they'll make a kind of forceful huffing sound at their competitor, and will sort of bring their spines down over their face and sort of jolt forwards at a competitor hedgehog. So it's quite a clever way to compete by using quite minimal energy, really. So the hedgehog's breeding season runs from mid-spring through to late summer. We're right in the middle of hedgehog breeding season at the moment. And if you're lucky enough to have hedgehogs in the area, perhaps you'll have seen either courtship, nesting females, or even hoglets by this time of year. They have a litter size, and mums have a litter size of about 4 or 5 hoglets. Unfortunately, though, only about half of those make it through to independence. Maternal care just lasts a few short weeks, so independence comes after perhaps 6 or 7 weeks after birth. So it's a very, very speedy process through to independence for those little baby hoglets. The dad doesn't have an awful lot to do with it, if you're wondering. It's really predominantly maternal care, it's exclusively maternal care. And here is the reason really for our existence and for the existence of lots of supporting hedgehog charities. Hedgehogs are not doing very well. So in rural areas, we've seen declines over the past 20 years of up to 50%. So up to 50% losses of our native hedgehogs just in the last 20 years. And that's really in rural areas. In urban areas, it's marginally better. So we're looking at declines of around 30% since the year 2000. So it's still not great by any stretch. They face a lot of different threats and pressures, whether that's in rural countryside or whether that's in our towns and cities. But there is something interesting going on there in towns and cities, in that rate of decline seems to be slowing. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about this, I would encourage you to read this report, The State of Britain's Hedgehogs, which was published in 2018. You can download it for free at hedgehogstreet.org/state-of, and it goes into this decline in some more detail. So it's unfortunate that we are seeing such drastic declines of the hedgehog, because year on year they top the charts of Britain's, sort of most iconic mammal. People really love this species. They're one of the few wild mammals that you can get quite up close and personal with. Yeah, really they face an awful lot of threats, and you might be interested to know what those threats are and how you can help. So really that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this webinar, and hopefully by the end of it you'll have some idea as to how you can help, perhaps at home in your own gardens, perhaps in the wider community, or in a work context, whether that's at a university or otherwise. They're lovely little animals, aren't they?
Jo, before we move on to that, we've just got a question in the chat box. Can we get to that before we move on?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it was just a question about the map, and does it matter if you record the same hedgehog more than once? And if so, how would you tell the difference between them?
It's very difficult to tell the difference between wild hedgehogs. So no, it's absolutely encouraged for you to log. You log a hog whenever you see it, regardless of whether you think it might be the same one. There's only kind of one really conclusive way to tell the difference between hedgehogs, and unfortunately it needs a license. So that would be to mark a hedgehog, but you do need a license in order to do that. So I can't encourage anyone to do that unless they do have a license.
So you just log it every time you see it?
Log it every time you see it, yeah.
Thanks, Jo.
Go on, sorry.
I was just going to say thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so it might be that in your area it looks as though you've got hundreds of hedgehogs. It might just be the same one hedgehog over and over again. So yes, unfortunately, hedgehogs do face an awful lot of threats, and I'm going to get this one out of the way first. It's the kind of the most contentious issue, really. Let's talk about predation in general. So hedgehogs can suffer from predation, and really when we're talking about predators, we're talking about badgers, foxes and dogs. Really, badgers are the only true predator of hedgehogs. Foxes and dogs may attack a hedgehog, but because of their adaptation to curling into a ball, foxes and dogs can't really get to the squishy parts of the hedgehog. Badgers, however, have got really long claws. They're able to unfurl hedgehogs and sort of eat the squishy bits from the middle. So sometimes you might see sort of a shell of a hedgehog out and about if you're wandering around. So badgers are the only true predator of hedgehogs, but they also compete for the same food source. So badgers and hedgehogs eat really predominantly insects, things like earthworms and beetles. So their relationship is really quite complex in that sense. Human actions from sort of farmland management and reduced hedgerows and increased monocropping really have driven that level of predation to sort of higher levels currently, but the evidence does suggest that with plenty of natural feeding and resting and nesting opportunities for both the badger and the hedgehog, they can still coexist, as they have done for millions of years. So we're not putting the blame exclusively on badgers. What we really try to encourage our universities and our communities to understand is that humans have driven this relationship to one of more predation than competition. So try where you can to offer plenty of natural feeding, nesting and resting opportunities, and some examples of that coming up next later on in the slide. So roads. Roads across the UK, they are everywhere. We need them to connect communities. It's just that we've got an awful lot more of them than we used to. So recent studies have estimated that a minimum of 15,000 hedgehogs are killed annually on these roads in the UK, and that's from data from the People's Trust for Endangered Species, who I'd encourage you to check out. They do some great research. Unfortunately, this is probably a considerable underestimate, and there are lots of research projects currently underway to try and refine that estimate. Other studies, I think there's one in Germany or thereabouts that was around an order sort of 10 times larger than that. So very likely to be an underestimate, unfortunately. And it is the reason why a lot of our universities have installed hedgehog crossing or hedgehog warning signs on campus, particularly in areas where roadkill is a problem, and that's something that you see across a lot of the UK. So installing signs and even barriers can be really good ways to kind of deal with that problem. So signs from the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, such as the one in the middle there that notes hedgehog crossing area, can be erected on private property, including university land. But there are also Department for Transport signs, so official Department for Transport warning signs, that I'm not sure whether they're available yet. I've certainly not seen any out and about. But again, as I mentioned, they will be looking to the big hedgehog map for areas of hedgehog roadkill hotspots, really. Regent's Park in London has done something quite novel. So they've got an isolated hedgehog population in their park, and what they've done to try and reduce the level of roadkill in the area is to install barriers, really, to the main roads. So they've put these small barriers in to kind of keep the hedgehogs away from that main road. On the other side of the park, they're given ample opportunity to wander as far as they need to, but those barriers just keep them away from the busiest roads. So there are some way we might feel powerless in the sense that roads kill an awful lot of wildlife, but there are some ways in which we can really help. So do consider that. Machinery is another threat that hedgehogs face. So when I'm talking machinery, I'm talking mowers and strimmers. Unfortunately, hedgehogs don't have a common fight or flight reflex. What they have is a freeze reflex. So if they hear a strimmer or a mower, they're not going to run away from it, they're going to curl up into a ball, which really is kind of a useless kind of adaptation to human machinery. And unfortunately, because hedgehogs nest year round, and by that I mean they'll be in hibernation nests during the winter, they'll be in day nests during the active season, or they'll be in breeding nests during the breeding season. So at the moment, they'll be in their breeding nests. That means there's not really any good time for cutting back areas of vegetation where hedgehogs could be nesting. So if you look at that image in the middle there, that's quite a typical sort of hedgehog nesting spot, really. So any overgrown areas, any bushes and hedges, any sort of log piles or leaf litter piles, that sort of thing. So yeah, strimmer victims and mower victims, very, very common. I've been talking to lots of hedgehog rehabilitators over the last few weeks. This is kind of the number one thing at the moment for reason for hedgehogs being admitted into care. Sometimes they can recover from these injuries, but very often they're either killed straight away, or it's an injury that just they could never recover from. For instance, they've had their nose completely trimmed off, or front legs completely trimmed off. What makes that quite difficult is that hedgehogs' nests can look a little bit cryptic. So the image on the right hand side there, often hedgehogs can choose to nest just simply in a loose pile of leaves. So a word of warning to anyone who's thinking of going out to do any cutting or garden management this weekend, just be very careful and perhaps check before you do. And that's really what we encourage our institutions, so our universities, to do. So check before you strim, really. We can send free strimmer stickers, which look just like these yellow stickers on the screen, and just encourage users to check the area before using equipment. And what we mean by check the area, a simple check. If it's just long grass and you can see quite well, a simple observation would do. You might want to sort of use your foot to just kick around and make sure that there's nothing there. If it's denser vegetation, then you're going to be getting on your hands and knees and checking. A lot of our university grounds teams will be doing that anyway for ground nesting birds, so it's just taking that extra step for hedgehogs. And think as well, is this an area really that needs to be strimmed or needs to be mowed? So we've been really heartened during the lockdown from university grounds teams and university campuses that have been happy to let some areas of campus grow completely wild. Really, that's just a consequence of there being no staff on campus, but there's been quite a lot of staff and student support for these areas to remain no-mow zones. So no-mow zones is something, or no strim zones is something that you can really try and adopt on campus or you know, in the sort of wider community. That's not to say everywhere has to be overgrown and wild, but try and at least think of areas that you could let, some areas that you could let be kind of left to go a bit more wild, really. Wild areas are great for wildlife, certainly. They're great for hedgehogs and great for all of the things that hedgehogs eat, so insects and the like. Let us know if you would like some of these mower or strimmer stickers. As I said, they're free and we can just send them directly to you in the post. Entanglement as well. So hedgehogs, just due to their anatomy, so they're covered in, you know, 5 or 7,000 spines per adult hedgehog. They do get themselves in some predicaments, unfortunately. So entanglement in things like litter, in things like netting, that kind of thing, really. So common culprits for hedgehog entanglement seem to be things like 6-pack holders, so those rings that go around beer cans, polystyrene cups, tin cans, unfortunately elastic bands, and netting, so sports netting and garden netting. So those things can really, really harm wildlife in general. But yeah, often year on year we find hedgehogs in these sad predicaments. If you're lucky enough to find the hedgehog before it dies of thirst or hunger, then you know, that's wonderful. It can be taken to a hedgehog rescue and given some fluids and released back into the wild again. But unfortunately, you know, you're not that likely to find a hedgehog in need that's been trapped in some litter. So it's a really, really common and very, very sad thing to see. And we encourage our teams to really deal with that problem at the source. So deal with netting, deal with litter before it becomes a problem. This is an image from Birmingham University, one of our hedgehog friendly campus teams. They've been with us from the beginning. And when they're on campus anyway, they focus a lot of their efforts on community litter picks. They know they've got hedgehogs around, so they want to do right by them. So regular litter picks are something that we would absolutely condone. For hedgehogs, get right in the hedges. So it might not be, you know, just the litter that you can see. Think about the litter in the areas that hedgehogs are going to be inhabiting. So we're talking about hedges and hedgerows and, you know, sorts of wilder areas that when you start to look, you know, you could be there a while for all the litter. Clean hubs. So we've had quite a few universities invest in clean hubs or look towards clean hubs. Lincoln University is one really good example. So they've received some funding. I believe it's from Keep Britain Tidy, where they've got an area on campus that's just a place with litter pickers and bin bags. So anybody that's got a half an hour lunch break can just pop and grab a litter picker and go and do some litter picking on campus. So there's no restriction really to anybody that's got a sudden need to do some good for hedgehogs. Netting, so netting in sports pitches or garden netting on campus or in the community. Make sure that that's tied or set at least an absolute minimum of 30 centimetres off the ground. If you can tie it up completely, even better. So we're talking about things like football nets and tennis nets, very, very common places for hedgehogs and other animals to get trapped. So deal with that netting, deal with that litter. So drowning is unfortunately another threat that hedgehogs can and do face. So here's an image of a hedgehog having a wee swim in a pond. So hedgehogs can swim, and because of the way that their spines are, so they've got, as I said, 5,000 or 7,000 spines per adult hedgehog, and they're hollow, so they're filled with air, which makes them quite buoyant. So they can swim quite well, but unfortunately they can't climb out of smooth-sided ponds. So if they are to fall in a pond or a lake that has a smooth side or a sheer drop, they're just going to paddle and paddle and paddle until they have no paddling left in them, and then they'll drown. And that can happen and does happen, across the UK. So while hedgehogs can swim, they can't swim forever. So a lot of our universities and people in the community have been looking to make ponds, lakes and other water sources more safe for wildlife. So provide escape ramps. That's really the sort of simple solution there. So escape ramps can be whatever you want them to be. They can be physical ramps, such as the image on the right hand side there, stepping stones layered one on top of each other, or even simply like this image on the left hand side, I think it's from Regent's Park, stacked sandbags. And so all of those things will give a hedgehog or other animal that's fallen into the water a little bit of purchase to be able to climb back safely out of the water. And this isn't an argument against ponds. So water sources are really absolutely valuable for wildlife. They're necessary for wildlife. They just need to be made safe. So that extra little step there. So for our universities that are listening in, it might just be a case of a bit of retrofitting with some escape ramps. And what a lovely bit of PR for your staff and students, that's why it's there. So yeah, make your ponds and your lakes safe. So usually we do an awful lot of campaigning about bonfires in the run up to bonfire night, but bonfires are a threat to hedgehogs as well. So as mentioned already, hedgehogs have no fight or flight reflex. They do have the freeze reflex, which unfortunately isn't a great adaptation against fire or smoke. So year on year we find hedgehogs burned alive during bonfire night or around the season of bonfire night. And really that's because bonfires before they're burned are basically hedgehog havens, aren't they? So what we've done is we've stacked up a load of leaf litter and twigs and logs, which encourage invertebrates and provide a really good shelter for a hedgehog. So of course they're going to crawl underneath. Of course they're going to go in that bonfire pile. And then we go and set it on fire. Oh dear. So the best thing we can suggest really is that you check for hedgehogs before lighting that bonfire, or move it before burning. So on the day of burning, move the pile, relocate it to the other side of the garden, and then you can be absolutely safe in the knowledge that nothing's crawled in there during the day. If it's a really big bonfire, so community bonfire, then what you can do is install barriers in advance of lighting. So as soon as the the log pile is starts to be made, install some barriers that means that wildlife, so things like frogs, toads, hedgehogs, all sorts of other animals aren't going to get caught up in that bonfire. And do ask for flyers and leaflets. We've got an awful lot of flyers and leaflets for community members, universities, anyone really, around bonfire night that's going to get that message out there to people. So a lot of what we do really focuses on education and getting the issues out there to people. This one, thankfully, is quite well known, that hedgehogs can be burned in log piles during bonfire night. But a lot of these other issues that hedgehogs face aren't quite as well known. And we do have posters or flyers basically for every one of these issues. So other threats that hedgehogs face include pesticide use, herbicides, rat poisons, that kind of thing. So wildlife in general faces threats from poisoning, but we want to just draw your attention to some that particularly have impacts on hedgehogs. So, and this is really because a lot of universities do use these poisons on campus. It might be, just a consequence of, you're overrun with rats, or maybe it's just because these have been, in your policies and procedures for years and years, and you've not necessarily thought what the alternatives could be. But let's start with rat bait boxes. So this image in the top right corner here, you'll have seen those before. They are everywhere. So these rat bait boxes, really the idea is that there's poison bait food inside the tunnel, and rats come along and eat the food. It's filled with an anticoagulant that causes basically internal hemorrhaging. So it's a nasty way to go for any animal. Unfortunately, if you have a look at the size of that hole, so the manufacturers do say that these are species-specific traps, but if you have a look at the size of that hole, just the right size for a baby hedgehog. So we really advocate to all of our universities to look to alternative methods of pest control when it comes to rats. So whether that's poison-free baiting, catch and release, anything like that. We do have a code of conduct, the CRRU code of conduct. We're happy to share with you that has some best practice in there, but really we would like to see all of our universities get rid of these. As a kind of consequence of having poisons in the environment, what you do end up with is impacts on non-target species. So hedgehogs, interestingly, will eat carrion. So they'll eat dead birds, they'll eat dead mammals. If they find them on the side of the road, they're quite opportunistic feeders in that sense. So that kind of build-up of poisons within the hedgehog, we're currently doing a lot of studies into, well, not me personally, but hedgehog charities are doing a lot of studies into what those direct consequences could be. And it's looking as though those consequences could be impacts on sort of the number of young, really, that hedgehogs are able to produce, which when only half of those young can make it to past the weaning stage at the moment, any impact in that sense is going to be really damaging to hedgehog populations across the country. So we talk about pesticide use as well. So pesticides with things like glyphosate in them, toxins like glyphosate in them, can have direct impacts on populations of things like earthworms and other insect populations, really, that hedgehogs rely on for food. And so if you think of it in that way, it's really sort of an indirect effect on hedgehogs. So we're getting rid of a lot of the food sources for hedgehogs in these areas where they really, really rely on them. And some of these pesticides, like slug pellets, can contain toxic substances like metaldehyde, which at the moment the Hedgehog Society is doing an awful lot of campaigning on to try and basically get rid of. So the impacts again on hedgehogs and other wildlife can lead to either direct poisoning or issues with fecundity in the future. So it's really a serious thing. So cut out the chemicals where you can. We've got universities that have gone completely organic or have at least considered using organic alternatives. There's things like cotton pellets or wool pellets for slug and snails, things like copper tape and that kind of thing. Encourage landowners nearby as well to cut out chemicals. So if for any of you that are sort of listening and are just, you know, a part of the community, there's lots that we can do to educate people in the sort of wider community. It's not just universities that we're hoping to engage with here. So engage them in, and encourage them to use more organic alternatives. And just as a final, because rat bait boxes are the bane of my existence, please consider alternatives to rat bait boxes where you can. So we'd be happy to suggest some alternatives. If you want to get in touch, as I said, we've got that code of practice we'd be happy to send out. So urbanisation is one other threat that hedgehogs, serious threat really, that hedgehogs do face. And really that's in the sense that we're losing a lot of natural spaces, a lot of natural habitat for hedgehogs, and plonking great big housing estates on them. So really what that means is we're removing access to nesting and hibernation sites. We're also, this also means that hedgehogs are more vulnerable to roads, have less access to vital food sources that they need, and that they've got very, very fragmented habitats, in the sense that big areas that hedgehogs would usually have lived on, I suppose, are being sort of fragmented by big wide A roads or by big wide housing estates, and this causes several problems. So if you've heard of the term Hedgehog Highway, this is a big campaign that lots of hedgehog charities are promoting at the moment. It's really, hedgehog highways are a way to open up housing estates like this to animals like hedgehogs, because often we've got fantastic resources in our back gardens that hedgehogs can access, but only if they've got somewhere to get in and out. But these new housing estates don't tend to have access into gardens. What we tend to see really is kind of walled off, fenced off gardens, rows and rows of them, streets and streets of them. But we could be doing a little bit more to, you know, to think a bit more clearly about this issue. And we can retrofit with hedgehog highways. So hedgehog highways are just small 13 by 13 centimetre holes in walls and fences that allow hedgehogs in and out. It's as simple as that, really. So retrofitting, it's definitely doable, particularly if you've got just wooden fences. What's also happening recently, which is really lovely, is that a lot of new housing developments are being built with these hedgehog highways included, and that's thanks to a petition that received almost 1 million signatures recently from a UK hedgehog author and ecologist called Hugh Warwick. It went very, very viral, and thankfully, yes, now we're going to get lots of new developments with these hedgehog highways in. But let's think about retrofitting too. Think about your own gardens, think about your campuses, think about, you know, wherever it is you work. Is there somewhere that you could be installing these hedgehog highways, and give local hedgehogs access to the resources in those areas? They also range a really long way, so up to sort of 2 miles, if not more, a night. So opening up these hedgehog highway areas are going to be really, really beneficial for hedgehogs, and encourage your neighbours to do it too. So we could end up with, you know, a massive kind of nature reserve for hedgehogs if we were all to do this, all to link up our gardens and green spaces with hedgehog highways. Nice and simple action. So other ways you can help to reduce the threat of urbanisation and the threat of, you know, development in our sort of urban areas is to make homes for hedgehogs. So think about, you know, DIY houses. Think about, you know, just simple log piles. You can also build your own hedgehog houses. So that image on the left hand side there is a quite funky style palace really for a hedgehog. But they can be really simple. You know, as I said, just a pile of logs, or leave that patch of bramble in the back of your garden. You might see it as a annoyance, but a hedgehog sees it as a great place to build a nest. So homes for hedgehogs, whether they're, you know, natural homes or whether they're these sort of wooden hedgehog houses, fantastic. So whichever way you do it, really, you're going to be doing something great for hedgehogs. There's loads of guides online if you want to make your own. So you can try the British Hedgehog Preservation Society or the People's Trust for Endangered Species for some of those guides online. Lots of our universities have done this. So at bronze level, you're given a tick if you have a hedgehog house on campus. Think about creating wild corners as well. So again, this is something that we give ticks for. for our awards scheme. So wild corners really are exactly what they sound like. So just leave patches of areas on campus or your garden or wherever it is in the community to just go a bit wild. So just grow with whatever native species are sort of inherently there. Wild gardens look great, and of course it saves you time as well. So if you're thinking about, as a grounds team, if there's an area that you've earmarked to be a wild corner, essentially a wild corner is completely unmanaged. So it's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, you can focus your efforts elsewhere. So wild corners are really great. You can use them for areas to leave log piles. So log piles encourage, as they rot down, they encourage lots of insects, and insects make fantastic food for hedgehogs, but log piles also make really good natural nests as well. And I've mentioned already, these are species that people tend to, gardeners certainly, and grounds teams tend to preferentially remove, but things like bramble and hawthorn actually end up, it turns out, fantastic places for hedgehogs to nest. So we are encouraging a lot of our universities at the moment to reinstate patches of bramble and hawthorn in areas of campus where either where they've been removed or somewhere near, within sort of two kilometres or so from where they've been removed in the past. And what we're doing then is just, we're reinstating a bit of natural native hedgehog nesting area for them. A few suggestions on there in terms of wild corners, so and ways that they can benefit hedgehogs. So for food, hedgehogs will be looking for plants that have a nectar source. So plants with a nectar source, things like wildflowers like oxeye daisies, or fennel and candy tuft. Those are really great species to encourage sort of natural feeding availability for hedgehogs. And of course for nesting, things like bramble and hawthorn, as already mentioned, but hedgehogs will also be looking for areas that have the right sort of leaves available for them to make their nests. So you might not have thought that they use a specific kind of leaf, but they won't use any leaves that are really, really big. So oak leaves, for instance. What they'll tend to select more preferentially are those from sort of deciduous medium-sized leaf native trees, so things like hazel and beech trees. So for those of you thinking to do some tree planting on campus or nearby, here's something that you can sort of preference in the run up to getting involved in Hedgehog Friendly Campus. So something that's deciduous with medium-sized leaves. So loads of great ideas for wild corners there, and a lot of our universities, particularly those that know they've got hedgehogs on campus or near campus, are putting out food and water for their hedgehogs. So it's great, really, really great to be making sure that they've got natural feeding areas. So again, that last slide explained a few of those areas. So we're talking about log piles, we're talking about wildflowers, we're talking about wild corners. But you may also want to put some supplementary food out for hedgehogs. So I think it's the University of York, a big shout out to them because they're amazing, that have a rota for feeding their campus hedgehogs. So staff and students take it in turns to make sure that hedgehogs on campus do have access to meaty pet food. So the best thing you can feed a hedgehog as a supplement is wet or dry cat or dog food. Just make sure it's not got any milk in it. So don't give hedgehogs milk. Please also don't give them bread. So hedgehogs are lactose intolerant. So really just fresh water is the best thing, really the only thing that you can provide a hedgehog to drink. And in terms of food, as mentioned, meaty pet food. So things like iams or kitten food, kitten biscuits, whiskers, that sort of thing. There's an image in the bottom right there of a hedgehog's feeding station. So a feeding station is one way to stop cats getting at the food. So you can pop the food inside a little storage container. Cats won't really want to go inside those storage containers, so it keeps the food safe from kitty mouths. So that's something that you could look to do, and particularly if you've got hedgehogs, if you think you've got hedgehogs coming into your garden, that's one of the best things that you can do to help. And of course, support a hedgehog project. So there's lots of hedgehog projects out there because they're not doing so well, and because of how great a response we get from community members and staff, students, school groups, women's institute groups. Everybody loves a hedgehog, and I think everybody really wants to do what they can to help. if you need to know how. So there's plenty of hedgehog projects out there, regional, national, for you to have a look at. Hedgehogs is one example. So for anyone that's joined us from Oxford University or lives in or near Oxford, that's one of your local projects that you can get involved in. So they're looking for hedgehog sightings in Oxford at the moment. Hedgehog Street is a national campaign that's run by the People's Trust for Endangered Species and the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, and that's really a sort of community campaign that's aiming to get anybody that, you know, whether you're a young person, an older person, a staff member, a student, anyone involved in sort of spreading the word about hedgehogs and making your street and your area, your community more hedgehog friendly. So that one's got a really great community approach. Check Hedgehog Street out for more advice on what you can do in your own gardens. And of course, Hedgehog Friendly Campus. So sort of final shout out there really for anybody that isn't currently involved and would like to be, just get in touch and we can send you some information through about registering and getting involved in Hedgehog Friendly Campus. Loads you can do even during this strange period where people aren't studying or working on campus at the moment. Plenty that you can be getting involved in. So a big thank you to everybody for listening today. Here are our contact details for anybody that would like more information or would like to get involved. I would encourage you to give us a follow on social media, give us a share if you can. Our aim is to get every single university in the UK involved in some way in Hedgehog Friendly Campus in the coming years that we're delivering the campaign. So yeah, a big thank you everybody for joining, and a last big thank you to the British Hedgehog Preservation Society for the funding.
Thanks, Jo. So we've got a few questions in the chat box that I'd like to get through. We do have to finish quite promptly, probably at 5 to, because we've got a completely unrelated webinar starting at 1 that we need to kind of log off and log back in for. So sorry to kind of rush through. It was a great presentation and seems quite daunting at first when there's so many threats to hedgehogs, but it's so great to hear that there are so many things that we can be doing for the hedgehogs. So Jo, can we go through some of these questions quite briefly, and then if we want to go into more detail with everyone, maybe they could send you a follow-up email. Is that okay?
Sorry, yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Great, so we've just got a few questions. So one is around garden is an island surrounded by farming, and that the farming might be a threat to the hedgehogs. And is there anything you can suggest to mitigate the threat caused by adjacent farms?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons we believe why hedgehogs are doing so poorly in rural areas, and that's the threat of farming, really, the threat of agriculture. So one of the best things that you can do if you live in a village, so I'm in a very similar position actually, one of the best things that you can be doing is just making sure that what you have control of in your garden and in your area is suitable for hedgehogs. So keep your garden as wild as you can, be doing giving supplementary food, and talk to your community, talk to the farmers, talk to your neighbours, try and get them involved in these schemes and these campaigns as well. One of the biggest threats really in rural areas is the lack of native hedgerows. We've gotten rid of a lot of our hedgerows, but there is some sort of funding and grants available out there for farmers that want to reinstate those hedgerows. So a bit of research will go a long way. Be happy to tell you a bit more of that if you want to get involved, get in touch on email.
And Lillian's got a question about a road project where they're going to be chopping down hedge and trees, and around any organisations that could survey the area to kind of protect the hedgehog. Lina, I think this might be a good one to follow up with Jo in an email, because I think it could be a bit more chunkier. So if you want to send an email to Jo on the email address here to ask that question. That's great. One about Royal Mail, because the elastic bands we've...
Hi, sorry, the email address.
Oh, it's on the screen here, info@hedgehogfriendlycampus.co.uk on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, great.
And what about Royal Mail, who always seem to be dropping elastic bands? And is there any way to engage them to stop them from dropping elastic bands?
Yeah, so the British Hedgehog Preservation Society did actually develop, it's very clever, they developed a mailer, so a little sort of postcard with with some information about that very thing on. So obviously, who delivers that mail? It will be your postman. So it's definitely an issue. It's perhaps something that still needs a bit of attention. Have a look on the British Hedgehog Preservation Society website, and there are some sort of posters and leaflets available. Talk to your local post person as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I think we potentially just one more quick question that we have time for is it likely that this will roll out to hospitals? We have a lot of green impact organisations running in hospitals who I think some will be joining us today on the webinar, but is there kind of hedgehog friendly hospitals in the works or as a potential?
Great question. Yes, yeah. It's when I say in the works, it's something that we would love to do. We're just kind of only in the second year really of Hedgehog Friendly Campus in a university context. So I think really what the charity would like to see is that it is successful, which is one of the reasons why we're hoping to get as many universities as possible on board so we can really evidence that this does work. As an aside, Winchester University's Hedgehog Friendly Campus team are working with their local NHS building to try and their grounds team to try and implement some of the stuff that they're doing on campus in their neighbouring NHS site. So if you are an NHS building in an area that has a hedgehog friendly campus team, we could perhaps put you in touch with them, and they can share a bit of best practice with you, even at the moment while we're not offering this as an accreditation just yet.
Great, thank you so much, Jo. Sorry for the rushed ending, but I think everyone in the comments is saying that it's been a really insightful talk, and I've learned a lot as well. So thank you so much for delivering this for us. And as you've got on the screen there, Jo's email or the other Hedgehog Friendly Campus email if you've got any questions that weren't covered, and we'll send a follow-up email to all the attendees with the recording in case you want to share it with anyone. So thank you so much for joining. I'll end this meeting now, and we've got more webinars coming up, so do keep an eye out for them, and we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. So thanks for joining, and thanks, Jo. Bye everyone.